Heard this beat in my dream.
What is going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got a review for you of the iPad Air 4 in what I believe is going to be an extremely popular product for the coming years. And in a lot of ways, it is like a continuation of what Apple has done very well in the last couple years, and that is offering great products from kind of the entry-level price point all the way up to the premium, with many of them sharing same features as their top models. This iPad has the brand new latest and greatest A14 processor. It has a lot of the same features and design of the iPad Pro. As someone who was a student a couple years ago and is often asked about whether or not someone should get an iPad or a MacBook, I believe that this is going to be one that makes the iPad an easier recommendation because it has the great ecosystem. It has support for the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, as well as the Magic Keyboard and third-party keyboard options. And as an all-in-one system, I believe that it is a really good bang for buck and has everything you need in terms of a productivity and also art system. My iPhone 12 coverage is live on the channel, but I also picked up an extra one for you guys, so make sure you follow me over on Instagram at justin.tse, subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and comment your username down below, as well as on other videos that I mentioned this for an extra chance, and I'll be DMing one of you guys on November 15th. So by the time you guys are watching this video, I've had this product for about a week. I got it about a week early, and I've had a chance to go ahead and test it, and as someone from the perspective of an iPad Pro user, this definitely has all the best of what I enjoy from that tablet. So we're also going to talk about like how it compares to the iPad 8, the iPad Pro, and just where this fits in the lineup and which one you should go ahead and buy, because it is always going to be specific to the user. So just to sum up all the differences between this and the iPad Pro, it comes in at a price of $599, and that gets you 64 gigs of internal storage. The next model up is $699, and it gets you 256, which makes that a very attractive option. And on the inside, you've got the A14 processor paired with 4 gigs of RAM versus 6 on the Pro. You have a stereo speaker setup as opposed to 4 on the iPad Pro. And for the display, it is a 10.9-inch liquid retina screen that comes in at a brightness of 500 nits compared to 600 on the Pro. It is also missing the ProMotion 120Hz features, but in terms of other similarities, the design and form factor is identical. It fits in the same accessories. You also have Touch ID on the top as opposed to Face ID, and on the bottom you have a USB Type-C port, which gives you up to 5 gigabits per second of transfer. So if you're hoping to edit your photos off of an SD card or connect it to your camera, that is super easy to do. So the display, I believe, is one of the biggest changes to this year's iPad Air. And aside from the obvious of the bezels being smaller, no home button and everything, this is pretty much the same as the iPad Pro 11, but the screen is like a hair smaller at 10.9 inches and a PPI of 264. But it is missing a couple features, and some of which you're going to care about more than others. One of which is the fact that it doesn't have ProMotion, which is the fast refresh rate of 120 Hz. And you can definitely notice it if it's side by side, like going through the menus and stuff. It just feels a little bit snappier, but it is definitely not a deal breaker. And I feel like for the vast majority of people, you're really not going to care. And the other thing is the display is about 100 nits dimmer. So this has a 500 nit screen, the iPad Pro has 600 nits. So if you're using your iPad a lot outside, you might notice like a slight difference, but that comes out to being less than a 20% difference in terms of brightness. So once again, if you're going for the base model and you're saving $200, I don't think you're really going to mind. So when it comes to hardware and form factor, I actually really like the squared edge. I've always liked it since the day the iPad Pro came out, and I'm not really sure what Apple could do in the future in terms of redesigning this tablet, because I feel like even today, I think it is like the perfect shape and size for an average user. The new iPhone also went back to a flat edge, and in this case, it is just super minimal and very flat, easy to have accessories on. It's got very strong magnets, and on the front, the bezels are relatively small, but I know in the future they could possibly be smaller as well. This entire unit right here weighs in at just about 1 pound, and it is about 13 grams lighter than the iPad Pro, and that is because some of the camera elements and stuff are not present on the back. But otherwise, if you're just to travel with the tablet itself and maybe a folio case, it is extremely light. Once you add the Apple Smart Keyboard, it does add a bit of weight because it does have like the counterbalance and the magnets and everything, but nevertheless, I think the reason why this is so popular is just the amount of things you're able to do on something that is much lighter than a computer in some ways. This one right here is in blue, of course, but it does come in 5 different colors, including a blue, a pink, a green, silver, and gray. And I've got to say, my personal favorite is probably just like a simple space gray. But from the Instagram poll, it looks like you guys like the blue one the most by a mile. So here's like a bit of a look at that. But the aluminum body is super durable and light. And otherwise, I just don't have much to say about the kind of design of the iPad. I think it is perfect for what it is. In terms of my personal opinion, between Touch ID and Face ID, I can totally see why it doesn't have Face ID. There's like more sensors and elements on the front that is more expensive and that is more reserved for the Pro model. The Touch ID is really fast. So just put your finger on there, it senses it right away. And whether you have it in like portrait or landscape mode, it works perfectly fine. But I got a little bit used to Face ID on the iPad Pro. So in some ways, I can say I sort of miss it, but I don't really think it is a big deal. So aside from all the hardware and the specs and all the great stuff about that, I feel like what obviously makes the iPad at the end of the day is the ecosystem and software experience. When you look at a computer, it is a much more open platform. You've got a ton of apps on the market and just so many, whether you download it online or download it from the App Store. And even though that is like the full experience and is something that I obviously use on an everyday basis, what the iPad is able to do is deliver you a more curated experience that is made specifically for this form factor, and in many ways is like a simplified version that still gives you access to all the great tools of general applications. Some great examples of that are Photoshop and also the video editing software such as LumaFusion that is made for the iPad and actually has a lot of the same features as like iMovie and some of which from Final Cut. But depending on what accessories you buy, you can even get a better experience that you can only get on a tablet and can't find on a computer, such as like Procreate. So you get the keyboard, you've got the trackpad, but if you want to also pick up an Apple Pencil and have like the experience of being able to do creative stuff, drawing, painting, sketching, and even for productivity such as marking up PowerPoints and for architectural stuff, that makes the iPad very popular and my go-to option when kind of marking edits on photos that are done by the graphic designer. I also personally love to edit photos on the iPad because instead of having to use like a mouse to navigate around the screen on a computer, I can just go ahead and use the pen and adjust the size of the tip. And I also tried making some animations and GIFs on the iPad for videos, which is something that I want to do a little bit more depending on time. The fact that it has Apple's very own chip running an ecosystem that is specific to the iPad and has millions of apps that is really developed since the day the iPad came out makes it something that I can much more confidently recommend as a laptop replacement in 2020. And at $599, you just really can't go wrong. Beyond that, I even prefer it for multimedia. On a flight, for example, I feel like having an iPad is just way less real estate than using a laptop just to watch some Netflix and some TV shows and whatever it is. The iPad is like the ultimate multimedia machine, and it has now become pretty much a computer as well. And it really does bring a lot of excitement as to what Apple is able to do with their own chips on the ARM MacBooks that are going to be coming out in November. But even with iPadOS 14, it is still far from perfect, and they've got a lot of things that they need to do to be able to really make it a laptop replacement. And I feel like they almost made the Mac experience more simplified to be more like the iPad as opposed to the other way around. We still want to have like potentially the option to use a desktop-like experience on this tablet because it has all the capabilities to do so. So it might be something that we see in future models, and maybe as a form of differentiating the iPad Pro from the iPad Air, it might be an option that is exclusive just to that tablet model. So when it comes to the battery life, the claim time is 10 hours, and that is really respectable for a tablet because that is essentially going to get you through an entire day. In a lot of cases, if you're doing like video editing and photo editing, you're going to get closer to like maybe 6, but I feel like even then, with having a USB Type-C connector, you have a backup battery, that is all able to power the iPad by itself. And I believe 10 hours when it comes to watching video and multimedia is more than enough. And I find like on long flights, say like a 10-12 hour flight, I'll watch movies for like 5 hours. I can like keep it in the backpack for like a week or two, and when I go back to it, it still has enough juice that is left over to watch movies for pretty much most of the flight back. So battery life has never been an issue from an iPad, and I almost feel like it runs much more efficiently than a laptop because there's less background things running and the apps are optimized to run on Apple's very own chips. In the category of audio, the iPad Air has a dual speaker setup. So in other words, it is stereo. Even though there is 2 vents on the bottom and 2 on the top, just like the iPad Pro, it actually has a dual speaker setup, which actually does still sound pretty good, but the iPad Pro has a quad speaker setup, which sounds very good. So here's like a bit of a sound test of that. When it comes to the camera, this iPad has a single 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.8 aperture, and that is the same main camera found on the iPad Pro. And it is able to take pretty good photos if you want to. I personally don't really use my iPad for photos, so I don't really value the ultra wide and like the LiDAR on the iPad Pro. But if you need to get the quick photo or something for reference or for work, then it works totally fine. But if you're doing like a lot of augmented reality work, then of course an iPad with LiDAR and like the software and apps that are available makes it one of the most powerful devices in that field that you can have in the palm of your hand. So now let's go ahead and talk about some of the models, configuration, and which one you're gonna get the best bang for buck on, because I feel like with Apple products, it is never like a clear and unanimous decision. And that is because they're obviously a pretty good business. They know how to get their money, and the MacBooks especially are an area where you feel like it is very hard to decide because it's not cheap, and by the time you spend the money, you're kind of like, I could have just spent $200 more and got like double the storage again, and you get extra ports and this and that. Next thing you know, you might as well have just bought like a higher model or something, and that is definitely the case with the iPad. So I think the easiest decision is going to be for people who just do like a lot of web-based stuff or need it for like video streaming or multimedia, because for $599 you have 64 gigs, and that makes a lot of sense. If you really want to save money, you can go ahead and get the base model of iPad, the $329 of the iPad 8, but we're talking about the Pro and the Air here. The $599 model is good for anyone who is streaming. The other thing is, the model up from that is not 128 gigabytes. It is actually 256. So that comes in at a price of $749. And by then, it is only a $50 difference from the iPad Pro. And the iPad Pro has a base storage option of $799, and the iPad Pro has, and the $799 iPad Pro has 128 gigs of storage because they doubled the base option. And with that, you don't get the A14, but you get 6 gigs of RAM, a quad speaker setup, as well as a 120 hertz display that is 100 nits brighter. And you also have the 3 camera setup on the back, which adds the wide angle and the LiDAR. And that obviously makes the decision very hard. And I feel like for a lot of people, you're gonna wanna go with the Pro if it's only a $50 difference. So I feel like for the most part, the iPad Air is one of those where you either go with the base option or you go and get the base model of the iPad Pro. And I feel like for a lot of people, 128 gigs, considering the amount of cloud storage and files and all that you can do nowadays, is gonna make the most sense. I have the iPad Pro 2018 at the moment, and I find that I've used all the storage on that with all the movies and downloads, the operating system, and all that kind of stuff, that 128 gigs seems to make the most sense, but I'm not necessarily downloading enough movies to the point where 256 is gonna be completely used. So I think you wanna think very carefully, because I definitely have a bit of regret of getting the base storage option of the iPad Pro a few years back. But at the same time, I think $599 for what you're getting in the iPad Air 4 is an amazing deal. So if you're fine with the storage, then I would say get that one. But now let's talk about a lineup comparison between the iPad Air 4, the iPad 8, and the iPad Pro, because at the end of the day, the iPad Air is like the middle child of the lineup. And if you're wondering why I have the iPad Pro from 2018, it's because the 2020 barely changed anything aside from clocking the speed of the processor a little bit higher, so I didn't really feel the need to go and buy a brand new iPad that I use to watch Netflix and do emails on. But I think we should start out with the lowest price item in the lineup, and that is the iPad 8. This one was announced alongside the iPad Air, and it is a really good price. $329, you have upgraded processors, a 10.2-inch display, still great for multimedia. You can also pick up a keyboard for it, but I'm guessing if you're spending $329 on a tablet, you don't want to spend the price of a first-party keyboard and instead go and get a Logitech or a third-party one. And it is also compatible with the Apple Pencil first generation, which charges on the end. For $329, you have have something that is totally capable, say you're getting a tablet for your kids to play on, like educational stuff. I'm sure schools are gonna be buying a ton of these, but most of the time people just like use it to mess around. But if you're doing like emails and watching Netflix, then get the $329 iPad, because everything else is gonna be a little bit overkill. But if you like that, then the iPad Air 4 starts at a price of $599, which I think is a really good deal. You're getting a lot of characteristics from the iPad Pro, and it is much more similar to the iPad Pro than it is to the iPad 8. There's no bezels or anything. The display is a wide P3 color gamut, and you also have the A14 processor that is more powerful and opens up a lot of graphics and more kind of heavy tasks that you can put on your tablet and essentially replace a laptop. I don't really think the iPad 8 is one that can completely replace a laptop if that's where you're coming from, but if you're looking to get like a complementary piece to your laptop, then a $329 iPad can make a lot of sense. But now over to the iPad Pro 2020, I feel like right now is not the best time to buy the iPad Pro, because based on the indications that the iPad Air 4 has given with the updated processor and in a lot of ways being very similar to the iPad Pro but at a lower price, it could mean we're due to see a new iPad Pro as early as spring of 2021. And that is likely gonna have like mini LED display and like characteristics of an OLED screen, because this year's iPad Pro really didn't see anything major, and in Apple's defense, they didn't really have to do that much. So I think if you've been waiting to pick up an iPad for a while to essentially use for everything, but didn't really want to spend like the $800 to $1,000 after all the accessories, then the iPad Air is going to be the one. But on the other hand, if you want to have like the extra cameras, the LiDAR, ultra wide, and all that kind of stuff, and really future-proof yourself, then maybe try to wait until next year for the new generation of the iPad Pro. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to see any other videos of like the iPhone or iPad lineup, make sure you let me know, and I'll see you all in the next one.